Lates joked about the night before, asking if he'd finally met someone who could outsmart him. Jack laughed along but didn't say much. He didn't want to turn the encounter into a story for entertainment. It didn't feel right. There was something about that woman, the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, that made him feel like her story wasn't one to be passed around like gossip. Later that evening, he stopped by the same bar again, half hoping she might be there. The same music played, the same crowd filled the seats, but her corner was empty. He ordered a drink and sat down, wondering if maybe he had imagined how serious it all felt. Maybe she was just someone with a good sense of humor who happened to know a famous call sign. Still, part of him knew better. An older veteran sitting nearby struck up a conversation with Jack. They talked about deployments, bad coffee on ships, and long nights on missions. When Jack mentioned meeting a woman who called herself Viper 1, the veteran froze mid-sentence. His expression changed, the laughter fading from his face. "You said Viper 1?" the man asked quietly. Jack nodded. The veteran leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I heard that name years ago. When I was stationed in Okinawa, there was talk about a pilot, a woman, who intercepted an incoming threat over the Pacific. She wasn't supposed to be there. She acted before command even gave the order. They said her quick decision prevented a full-scale conflict. After that, she disappeared from the records. Some said she was reassigned. Others said she was part of a special unit." Jack listened carefully, his drink untouched. The story lined up too neatly with what he already suspected. The woman he'd met hadn't been exaggerating or pretending. She really was Viper 1. The veteran chuckled softly, shaking his head. "If that's who you met, son, you were sitting next to a legend." Jack went quiet. The thought didn't make him proud. It humbled him. He had met heroes before, people who had done things that never made it to the news, but this felt different. She wasn't just a name in a file or a face in a photo. She was real, sitting in a bar like any ordinary person, calm and unbothered by the weight of her past. A few days passed, and Jack got back into his regular rhythm. Training was intense and the days were long. But one afternoon, while checking in at the base office, he noticed something unusual. A group of officers from the Air Force had arrived for a meeting. Their uniforms looked different, foreign but familiar. Among them, for a split second, he saw her. She was wearing a dark blue uniform, her hair tied neatly, her face calm as ever. She walked beside a senior officer discussing something serious. Their steps were in sync, their tone professional. She didn't look in his direction, and he didn't try to approach her. He didn't want to interrupt or draw attention. Still, that brief glimpse was enough to confirm everything. She was no ordinary visitor. The presence of Air Force officers from another country meant something important was happening. Whatever it was above his clearance level. That evening, when Jack returned to his quarters, he found himself thinking about how strange fate could be. The world was vast, filled with people from every background and story. Yet somehow paths crossed in unexpected ways. He had met someone who carried a secret that most would never believe. And she had spoken to him like an equal. Not like a soldier trying to impress, but like someone who understood what it meant to serve. He couldn't help wondering what kind of life she led. To have a name that traveled through military stories yet choose to stay in the shadows. He imagined her in the cockpit of a jet, the sky burning around her, making decisions in seconds that could change history. But the image that stayed with him wasn't of the fighter pilot. It was of the calm woman in the corner of the bar, quietly sipping her drink, her eyes full of stories she'd never tell. A week later, the base was preparing for a joint training exercise involving air and sea coordination. It was the kind of event that required precision and secrecy. Late at night, while reviewing the mission outline, Jack came across a familiar code name in the classified section. His heart skipped a beat when he saw it. V1. He stared at it for a moment. It couldn't be, but every instinct in him said it was her. The file didn't have any names, only call signs and coded references. Yet there it was, V1, listed as an overseas advisor for air defense strategy. That was her. He closed the file and leaned back, letting out a slow breath. So she was still active, still working behind the scenes. It made sense. People like her didn't retire easily. They carried a sense of duty that went beyond borders. The next day, during a briefing, a senior officer mentioned that a group of foreign advisors would be observing the exercise. They wouldn't be participating directly, but would oversee coordination protocols. Jack listened quietly, not letting his face show anything. He already knew who one of those observers would be. When the exercise began, everything moved with military precision. Ships aligned, aircraft coordinated, and commands flowed through the radio. Jack worked on the ground team, ensuring communication between the air and sea units. It was intense, fast-paced, and required complete focus. Then, midway through the operation, a sudden shift in weather threw everything off. A storm cell moved in faster than expected, disrupting signals and forcing quick adjustments. Jack was in the command tent trying to help redirect communication when a calm voice came through the backup radio line. "Ground command, this is control. Adjust formation grid 9. Keep southern units steady. We'll guide them from above." The voice was steady, clear, and familiar. He froze for a second, his hands hovering over the equipment. It was her, that same tone, calm under pressure, giving clear instructions while chaos swirled outside. The officers in the tent responded immediately, following her directions without hesitation. Within minutes, the units realigned and the exercise continued smoothly. No one questioned who the voice belonged to. They just listened. When the storm passed and everything returned to normal, the command tent filled with relief. The operation had stayed on track thanks to those quick instructions. Jack didn't say a word, but he knew exactly who had saved the exercise from falling apart. That night, as he walked back to his quarters, the air was cool and quiet. The stars above were faint, hidden behind thin clouds. He thought about the woman again, the mysterious pilot who had once saved a convoy and now guided missions from behind the scenes. He realized something important that night. True strength didn't always come with rank or fame. Sometimes it lived in the quiet people who carried heavy responsibilities without ever asking for recognition. She was one of them. The kind who didn't need applause to know their worth. He knew he might never see her again. People like her came and went without leaving footprints. But even if their paths never crossed again, he would remember her, the calm woman who sat alone in a bar and changed how he saw the meaning of service. Before sleeping, he pulled out his notebook and wrote 3 simple words on a blank page. "Viper 1 lives." He didn't know why he wrote it, but it felt right. A small reminder that heroes don't always wear medals or stand on stages. Sometimes they sit quietly among us unnoticed until the moment they're needed most. The following week, the base was buzzing with stories about the successful exercise. Everyone talked about how smoothly things had gone despite the unexpected storm. No one knew who had guided the final phase, but word spread that a foreign observer had given the crucial commands that saved the mission from chaos. Jack stayed quiet. He didn't say her name or even hint at who it might have been, but deep down, he knew exactly who it was. Life on the base went on as usual. But something had changed in Jack. He'd seen bravery in many forms. Men running into danger, soldiers pushing through exhaustion, teams working in silence for hours. But this was different. There was something powerful about calm leadership, about making the right call when everything seemed to fall apart. That kind of strength stayed with him. One evening, a small group of officers gathered in the same bar near the base to unwind. The laughter was loud, the music upbeat. Someone brought up the exercise again, calling it one of the smoothest joint missions they'd ever had. Then one of them said he'd heard a rumor that a Japanese advisor had stepped in at a critical moment. Jack listened quietly from his seat at the corner. The others laughed, saying it was probably exaggerated. No outsider would dare take command during a U.S.-led operation, one man said confidently. Another replied, maybe, but whoever it was knew what they were doing. As they argued, Jack smiled faintly to himself. If only they knew who that outsider really was. That night he walked home with the cool wind brushing against his face. The streets were almost empty, and the faint sound of the ocean waves could be heard in the distance. He thought about how strange it was, how someone could do something extraordinary, something that changed everything and yet remained completely unknown. A few days later, he received a sealed envelope in his personal mailbox at the base. It had no sender's name, only a small seal in the corner, the kind used by international defense liaisons. Inside W, as a single piece of paper and a small photo. The paper had just one line written on it: "Thank you for keeping quiet." Below it was a photo of an F-15J fighter jet, the kind used by Japan's air defense units. On the side of the jet, written in small white letters near the cockpit, was the name V1. He stood there for a moment, holding the photo, feeling a strange mix of pride and awe. He didn't know how she'd found his address or why she'd sent it, but he knew it was her way of saying she remembered. He carefully folded the paper and kept the photo in his locker. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her again. She wasn't someone you met and forgot. She carried a weight that few could understand, the kind that came from years of silent duty and unseen sacrifices. The next morning, as he headed to the mess hall for breakfast, a group of new recruits were chatting loudly at a nearby table. One of them mentioned something about a ghost pilot who'd worked with the U.S. forces years ago. Jack turned his head slightly, listening without making it obvious. The recruit said the woman's call sign was Viper 1, and that she'd vanished after a mission gone wrong. The others laughed, saying it sounded like a made-up story. Jack smiled to himself again. People would always turn real heroes into legends because the truth often sounded too incredible to believe. Later that day, he was called into a meeting with his commanding officer. The base was preparing for another round of joint drills, and this time they were expecting visitors from multiple allied nations. His team would be responsible for coordinating ground operations and assisting foreign liaisons. As his CO listed the names of the incoming advisors, Jack felt his heartbeat quicken when he heard one of them, Commander R. Takahashi, Japan Air Defense Command. He didn't know her real name, but he had a feeling. The initials matched. When the day of the meeting came, the conference room was filled with officers in uniforms from different countries. The air was thick with professionalism and quiet respect. Then as the door opened, she walked in. She wore a crisp blue uniform, her posture perfect, her expression calm and focused. It was her, the woman from the bar, the pilot whose name echoed in military whispers. Her presence filled the room without her saying a word. When she introduced herself, her tone was polite and direct, and her eyes met his for just a brief second. There was recognition there, but also understanding, the kind that said, "Not here, not now." Throughout the meeting, she spoke with quiet authority, discussing communication challenges, flight patterns, and defense response times. Every word she said was measured, backed by experience. Even the senior officers listened carefully. She wasn't loud, but she didn't need to be. Her calm confidence commanded attention. After the meeting ended, most of the officers left the room. Jack stayed behind to help clear some files from the table. As he turned to leave, he heard her voice behind him. "It's good to see you again," she said softly. He turned and smiled. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." She gave a small smile in return. People remember those who listen more than they talk. They both stood there for a moment, the quiet between them comfortable. She looked at him with that same steady gaze he remembered from the bar. Then she said, "You've been careful." "I appreciate that," Jack nodded. Didn't seem like something to tell around a table. "Good," she replied. Not everything is meant for stories. He wanted to ask her more and about her missions, her life, what she was doing now. But he knew she wouldn't share those details. She wasn't the type to talk about herself. Instead, he asked if she missed flying. Her eyes softened slightly. "Every day," she said. "But sometimes the mission changes. You learn to serve in new ways." Before he could say anything else, another officer entered the room and she straightened immediately, her face turning professional again. She gave him a small nod before walking out, leaving him standing there in silence. That night, Jack sat by the window in his quarters, looking out over the base. The air was cool and the stars were faint but steady. He thought about her words. Sometimes the mission changes. It made him think about his own path, about the times he'd questioned his choices, the sacrifices that came with the uniform. He realized that for people like her, service wasn't just a job. It was a lifelong commitment. Even when the world moved on, they carried their duty with them, quietly with honor. A few days later, the joint team was invited to a private dinner hosted by the visiting officers. It was a formal event, filled with polite conversation and cautious laughter. Jack wasn't much for these gatherings, but he went anyway. Toward the end of the night, as people began to relax, a group of younger officers asked her about her flight experience. She didn't boast or dramatize. She simply told one story, about a mission where her jet's radar failed mid-flight during a defense patrol. She had to rely purely on instinct and manual navigation to return safely. Everyone at the table listened quietly, amazed by her calmness as she described it. When someone asked if she was ever scared, she smiled slightly and said, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's learning to fly through it." Jack watched her as she spoke. There was something deeply human about the way she said it. Not rehearsed, not distant, just honest. After dinner, as everyone began to leave, she passed by him again and said quietly, "You see now why I stay under the radar." He nodded, smiling. "I think I understand." She returned the smile and walked out, her figure fading into the night like a shadow that belonged to the sky itself. That night, Jack went back to his quarters and took out the photo again, the one with the fighter jet, V1 painted near the cockpit. He placed it on the table and looked at it for a long time. It wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a reminder of everything she represented: courage, silence, and the strength to keep flying, even when no one was watching. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again after the exercises were over, but somehow that didn't matter. Some people you meet not to keep in your life, but to remind you of something you forgot: who you are, why you serve, and what really matters when the noise fades. For Jack, that was what Viper 1 had become. Not a story to tell, but a memory to hold quietly. And somewhere out there, under the same sky, he knew she was still flying her own kind of mission, unseen but never forgotten. The following morning, Jack woke up earlier than usual. Even though the day ahead was filled with drills and briefings, his mind kept drifting back to the Japanese officer. The calm way she had spoken, the quiet strength she carried, and the precision with which she handled every situation left a lasting impression on him. She wasn't just a pilot or an advisor. She was someone who had learned to move through life with discipline, courage, and silence. As he got ready for the day, he thought about the lessons that weren't taught in training manuals, the ones that came from experience, from watching people act under pressure. He realized that he had learned something valuable from her without even trying. Not about tactics or missions, but about presence, about how a single person could command respect without raising their voice. Later, during the morning briefing, Jack's team was assigned to coordinate with a visiting group of foreign military personnel. They were there to observe procedures and share knowledge, but the exercise required everyone to stay on alert. As Jack took notes and listened to the instructions, he couldn't help but glance toward the door whenever someone entered. He wasn't expecting her, yet a small part of him hoped to catch even a fleeting glimpse of her presence. By midday, the drill was underway. Ground operations were running smoothly, but as always, unexpected issues arose. One of the communication lines faltered, and a delay in relaying coordinates threatened to slow the entire exercise. Jack quickly assessed the situation, trying to keep the teams aligned and the mission on track. Then, through the backup channel, a voice spoke clearly and calmly. "Ground units, hold positions. Repeat instructions are coming. Maintain formation grid delta until adjustments are complete." Jack froze for a moment, recognizing the tone immediately. Calm, measured, unwavering. It was her, Viper 1. The ground officers adjusted to her commands immediately, even without knowing her personally. Everyone followed her guidance, as if instinctively aware that she knew exactly what needed to be done. Within minutes, the miscommunication was corrected, and the exercise continued without further interruption. Jack's teammates exchanged puzzled looks, wondering who had given the instructions. He just nodded quietly, letting them think it was another anonymous expert from the visiting team. After the exercise, the officers gathered in the debrief room. While everyone discussed their performance, Jack noticed her quietly reviewing notes with another senior officer. She wasn't seeking praise or attention, just ensuring that every detail was accounted for. It was the same humility he had seen at the bar weeks ago, a calm authority that didn't need validation. Later that evening, Jack found himself walking near the hangars, where the visiting pilots' jets were parked. The smell of fuel and the faint hum of engines filled the air. He wasn't sure why, but he felt drawn to the area. As he approached, he noticed a familiar figure standing beside one of the aircraft, examining its instruments with precision. It was her. She looked up and saw him, her expression softening slightly. "You're here late," she said quietly. "I couldn't stay away," Jack replied with a smile. "Just wanted to see the action from a different angle." She chuckled softly. "Curiosity is a good trait in a soldier," she said. "It keeps you alert." They stood together for a moment, watching the pilots move efficiently around the hangars. Jack felt a rare sense of calm, as if the chaos of the past week had disappeared. In that silence, he realized that the presence of someone like her had a way of grounding you, of reminding you what mattered most: focus, discipline, and quiet strength. Jack finally spoke, asking how she handled the pressure so effortlessly. She paused, looking out at the parked jets before answering. You learn to trust yourself and your training. Fear is natural, but you can't let it control you. The mission is bigger than your worries. You act and you move forward. Her words struck him. He had faced countless dangerous situations in his career, but the clarity with which she spoke made him reconsider his own approach. He realized that true courage wasn't just about physical skill or speed. It was about maintaining calm under pressure, making decisions without hesitation, and accepting responsibility for every action. They talked quietly for another few minutes, sharing observations about the exercise, the differences in their military systems, and the challenges they faced in coordinating international operations. Despite the formality of the situation, the conversation felt natural, human, and grounded. She was disciplined, yes, but she was also relatable, someone who had fears, responsibilities, and moments of reflection just like anyone else. Before leaving, she handed him a small card with a simple message. Your discretion is appreciated. Continue to serve with the same dedication you show every day. Jack accepted it with gratitude, understanding that it was more than a polite gesture. It was a recognition of his integrity, a subtle acknowledgement that she had noticed his respect and quiet observation. That night, back in his quarters, he placed the card next to the photo of her fighter jet. He reflected on how extraordinary people could live ordinary moments in plain sight. She had been in the bar, quiet, unnoticed. Yet she carried the weight of experience, skill, and responsibility that few could comprehend. That balance between invisibility and influence fascinated him. Over the next few days, Jack continued his duties while keeping a watchful eye during the exercises. He noticed her working with other officers, observing, giving guidance, and ensuring every detail was precise. She rarely spoke more than necessary, but when she did, people listened. It wasn't just her words. It was the calm authority behind them that demanded respect. One evening, Jack found himself walking alone toward the beach near the base. The sun was setting, casting warm orange and pink hues across the water. He thought about her again, the quiet woman who carried a call sign that froze even the most seasoned serviceman. He realized that meeting her had shifted something inside him. It wasn't just about admiration. It was about understanding that leadership and courage came in many forms, often unseen, often unrecognized. He also thought about the lessons she had imparted without intending to. Her calm in the bar, her decisive actions during the exercise, her simple words about trust and responsibility. All of it reminded him of why he had chosen this path. Service wasn't about recognition or stories. It was about doing your part and staying true to your duty. Later that week, Jack attended the final debriefing of the joint exercises. The visiting officers praised the team for their coordination, noting how efficiently communication had been maintained despite the storm. No one mentioned the small interventions that had kept the operation on track. Jack knew that her guidance had played a significant role, but as before, he stayed silent. It wasn't his story to tell. After the debriefing, he walked past her office one last time before the visiting group departed. She looked up, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. No words were exchanged, but there was an understanding, a silent acknowledgement of shared respect and recognition of the work each had done. As he left the base that evening, Jack felt a sense of closure mixed with anticipation. The exercises were over, but the impact of meeting her lingered. He had witnessed a rare form of courage, one that didn't need applause, one that acted quietly and effectively in moments of uncertainty. She had taught him without realizing it, that real heroes often lived in the background, shaping outcomes without recognition or fanfare. Walking along the empty streets, the distant hum of the ocean nearby, Jack reflected on how rare it was to meet someone like her. She had entered his life briefly, shared a quiet presence, and left a lasting impression. The memory of her calm gaze, her measured words, and her unwavering confidence stayed with him, reminding him that courage wasn't always loud. Before turning in for the night, Jack placed the photo of the fighter jet and her card together on his nightstand. He knew he would carry them with him, not as tokens of fame, but as reminders of the quiet strength that existed in the world, the strength that often went unseen, yet shaped the course of events in ways most people would never understand. Jack drifted off to sleep thinking of the sky she had flown through, imagining her navigating storms, making split-second decisions, and guiding others with precision. He realized that even though their paths had crossed only briefly, the encounter had left a permanent mark. It had reminded him of what mattered most: focus, discipline, humility, and the courage to act without seeking recognition. And somewhere, far above the clouds, Viper One was continuing her mission, calm and steady, carrying the same quiet authority that had first caught his attention in a small corner of a crowded bar. Weeks passed after the joint exercises, and life on the base slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Jack had gone back to regular training, drills, and assignments, but the memory of her presence lingered in his mind. He often found himself reflecting on the lessons she had taught him without saying much: the importance of calm under pressure, of quiet observation, and of moving through life with discipline and integrity. One morning, Jack was called to the command center for a routine briefing. The room was buzzing with officers preparing for an upcoming international exercise, more complex than the last one. His team would again be coordinating ground operations, but this time, the stakes felt higher. Intelligence reports suggested that the exercise would simulate challenging conditions, including unexpected weather changes and communication delays. Jack knew this would test everyone's ability to adapt and stay composed under stress. As he entered the command center, he noticed familiar faces among the visiting advisors from different nations. Among them, for a fleeting moment, his heart skipped a beat. She was there, not in a uniform that identified her rank, but dressed professionally and carrying herself with the same calm authority he remembered. Jack didn't approach her yet. He knew some encounters were best left to unfold naturally. The exercise began smoothly. Units moved in formation, communication channels remained clear, and the initial phases proceeded without incident. Jack worked alongside his team, coordinating movements and relaying information, all while keeping an eye on the advisor's interactions with the team. Her presence, though quiet, seemed to command respect from everyone around her. Officers followed her subtle guidance without hesitation, and even minor corrections she made were implemented instantly. Then, as if on cue, complications arose. A sudden storm cell moved in faster than anticipated, causing delays in signals and threatening to disrupt the coordination of units. Jack's hands flew over the radio equipment as he tried to keep everything aligned. The tension in the room grew, and he could see the officers exchanging concerned glances. Through the backup channel, a calm, steady voice spoke, cutting through the chaos. "Ground units, hold positions. Repeat all coordinates exactly as instructed. Maintain alignment and await further commands." Jack froze. There was no mistaking the voice. It was her. Viper One. Everyone followed her instructions immediately. The voice was authoritative without being harsh, precise without being overbearing. Jack watched as the ground units adjusted formations and corrected errors, all under her guidance. Within minutes, the chaos began to subside. The storm had not disrupted the exercise as much as it could have, and the operation continued smoothly. After the exercise concluded, the debriefing room was filled with chatter about how well everyone had performed. Officers praised the coordination, noting that communication had never broken down despite the simulated storm. No one mentioned who had issued the decisive instructions that had saved the exercise from failure. Jack kept quiet. It wasn't his place to reveal her role. Later, after the debriefing, Jack found a moment alone near the hangars. She was standing beside a parked aircraft, reviewing documents and speaking softly into a headset. He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "You're here again," she said, glancing up at him with a faint smile. "I see you've been keeping busy." "I couldn't help but notice," Jack replied. "You handled everything perfectly, as always." She tilted her head slightly as if considering his words. "It's not perfection. It's preparation and focus. Chaos will always come, but calm decisions make all the difference." Jack nodded. He realized she was speaking not just about the exercise, but about life itself. Her words had a broader meaning, one that transcended military operations. Courage wasn't just about facing danger in combat. It was about facing the unexpected with steady composure, about making choices when no one else could, and about accepting responsibility without seeking recognition. For a moment, they stood quietly, watching the sunset cast long shadows across the airfield. Jack felt a sense of peace, a rare moment in his otherwise chaotic life. She had a presence that grounded him, a reminder that strength often came in subtle, unseen ways. She finally spoke, breaking the silence. "You've learned a lot this week," Jack smiled. "I think I have. More than I expected." Her eyes softened, and for the first time he sensed a personal warmth behind her professional demeanor. "Good. Remember, it's not about being seen or praised. It's about doing your duty with integrity, even when no one is watching." Jack felt the truth of her words deep in his chest. He had spent years striving for recognition in his career, chasing medals and commendations, but she reminded him that real honor lay in action, in quiet diligence, and in living by principles even when the world didn't notice. The next morning, Jack received a call from his commanding officer. A high-level operation was scheduled in the Pacific, involving multiple Allied forces. Jack's team would coordinate ground support, and the visiting advisors would play key roles in ensuring smooth cooperation. As he prepared for deployment, he reflected on the lessons she had imparted: how to stay calm, how to lead without demanding attention, and how to act decisively under pressure. During the operation, unexpected challenges emerged. Communication lines faltered again, weather conditions worsened, and navigation errors threatened to throw off the timing of the exercise. Jack and his team worked tirelessly to maintain order, but it was her guidance over the secure channel that made the difference. Her voice, calm and steady, directed units with precision. Every correction she suggested was implemented immediately, and within minutes, the operation was back on track. Jack watched in awe as she worked, realizing that her influence extended far beyond the exercise. Her calm presence instilled confidence. Her precise instructions ensured success, and her experience guided everyone without drawing attention to herself. She wasn't leading for recognition. She was leading because it was necessary. After the operation concluded successfully, the debriefing highlighted the teamwork and efficiency of all units involved. Her role was mentioned only briefly in general terms, but Jack knew the truth. She had been the guiding force, the quiet hand that steered the mission through potential chaos. Later that evening, Jack found her again near the airfield. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She stood alone, looking out at the horizon, as if contemplating the vastness of the world and the responsibilities it carried. "You've done well," she said softly when she noticed him. Jack shook his head. "You did most of it. I just followed your lead." She smiled faintly. "That's all any of us can do. Follow the lead when it's right and act when it's necessary. That's what service is about." They stood there together for a while, the quiet between them comfortable. Jack realized that meeting her had changed his perspective on life and duty. It wasn't about recognition or fame. It wasn't about medals or awards. It was about commitment, discipline, and the courage to act when it mattered most, often without anyone noticing. Before departing, she handed him a small envelope. Inside was a note and a photograph of a fighter jet in flight, the call sign V1 clearly visible near the cockpit. The note simply said, "Remember why you serve. Stay sharp." Jack carefully folded the note and placed it in his pocket. He knew he would carry it with him, not as a symbol of fame, but as a reminder of the quiet strength and courage she represented. Weeks later, back at the base after returning from the deployment, Jack reflected on the events he had witnessed. The lessons she had taught him, through words, actions, and presence, had become guiding principles in his own life. Courage wasn't about being the loudest or the most visible. Leadership wasn't about recognition. True heroes acted with integrity, focus, and calm, often without anyone noticing. Even though she had returned to her duties and would likely be deployed again, Jack felt a sense of gratitude. Meeting her, witnessing her actions, and understanding her quiet authority had left an indelible mark on him. He realized that people like her existed in every corner of the world, quietly shaping outcomes, protecting lives, and inspiring those who observed them, even if only briefly. One evening, as he walked alone near the coastline, the wind carrying the faint scent of the ocean, he thought of her flying high above, navigating challenges with precision and calm. He imagined her guiding operations, making critical decisions and remaining composed in moments of chaos. And he smiled, knowing that the world was safer and better because of people like her. People who served not for glory, but because it was their duty. Jack placed the photo of the fighter jet and the note on his nightstand side by side. He didn't need reminders of fame or recognition. He needed only the lessons, the example, and the inspiration. He had met someone extraordinary, someone whose presence and action spoke louder than words. And he knew that even if their paths never crossed again, the memory of Viper One would remain with him forever. The story of that quiet woman at the bar, the legendary pilot, the calm and decisive officer, had become a part of him. And as Jack closed his eyes that night, he carried with him the knowledge that true courage often lives in silence, in humility, and in the steady, unshakable presence of those who serve without seeking attention. And somewhere above the clouds, Viper One continued her mission, calm, precise, and unwavering, guiding her team, protecting lives, and reminding the world that quiet strength is often the most powerful force of all.